Now, a spectacular Yoga Day event at the United Nations headquarters, a striking address to the US Congress, and an extravagant state dinner at the White House. All of that accompanied by a whole slew of major deals. It's been a historic week for Brand India, a week that's reflected India's growing stature on the global stage, but also a week that has reflected what is seeming to be one of the most important and the most strategic partnerships of the 21st century, the partnership between India and the United States. Prime Minister Modi kicked off his visit to the United States on the 21st of June by leading a mega Yoga Day event at the headquarters of the United Nations. And the real business began because the same day the Prime Minister left for Washington, D.C. On the afternoon of June the 21st, he was received at the White House by the American president. This was their first bilateral interaction during the visit. It was marked by the exchanging of exquisite state gifts that reflected the personalities of the two leaders and also the immense goodwill that they now seem to share. But then continued to unroll the real business of the trip. And I have to say, it was a really impressive order of business, perhaps a visit that has unfolded actual action like very few have in the past. And I'm just going to try and break that down for you to some extent. On the top of the list was some of the deals. The much anticipated HAL-GE deal, for example. General Electric's aerospace unit has signed an agreement with India's state-owned Hindustan Aeronautics. This deal will add wings. India and the US will co-produce F-414 engines for the Indian Air Force, and they will be used to power Tejas Mark II fighter jets. Another crucial deal was that of the MQ-9B Sea Guardian and Sky Guardian drones. Now, days ahead of Prime Minister Modi's state visit, sources close to the Indian Defence Ministry had disclosed that India had approved the drone deal after years of back and forth, and it has finally officially been announced. Then we have chips and semiconductors. The American memory chip firm Micron Technology says it will invest up to $825 million in a new chip assembly plant in Gujarat. This will be the company's first factory in India. Meanwhile, a new venture backed by Indian solar panel maker Vikram Solar will invest up to $1.5 billion in the US solar energy supply chain. It will begin with a new factory in Colorado next year. That was all about defense and technology. Deals were also announced for other sectors as well. For starters, we have the H-1B visa renewals. The process will be simplified a great deal as the US has unveiled plans to introduce in-country renewals. Indians employed in the US will no longer have to travel overseas back home and then try and get the visas. India has also joined the Mineral Security Partnership. The US-led global partnership was launched in June last year. It aims to create critical energy mineral supply chains. Moving on to space, the Prime Minister said the sky is not the limit, and India has agreed to join the US-led Artemis Accords on space exploration. It will work with NASA on a joint mission to the International Space Station in 2024. So what is worth noting is not just the deals themselves, although they are very impressive, but also the implications. This trip clearly marked the unveiling of a dramatic and possibly world-changing partnership between India and the United States, and especially in the field of technology. The US has said, and it said it some time back, that it will help India rise as a major power. Now we are seeing that in actual action. From its side, India is also indicating something important. It's indicating it is not a one-way street. The partnership has benefits for both sides. Look at the jobs being created in the USA, for example, from aircraft orders alone. India is not an American ally, and perhaps it will never be, not a formal ally. But both sides have indicated that this partnership, with both sides contributing, could be something far more valuable. It could actually shape a world that is being threatened by a hegemonic and possibly dangerous power like China. Now, some analysts had questioned whether Indian and American interests were always aligned. Do they vote together? Does India always support the United States? Now, it clearly appears that both sides have accepted that they can disagree. They can disagree on issues like Russia, for example, and yet they can build a strategic partnership. All of this and the importance of India-American relations was clearly outlined by the Prime Minister in his address to the joint session of the US Congress. It was in 2016 when he delivered his first address to the US Congress. This one was the second, and the question is, what did he speak about at that particular event? Well, a host of things. He, of course, spoke about the obvious things like the strength of the Indian diaspora and the value that they bring to American democracy. He categorically mentioned that this includes Kamala Harris, who happens to be of Indian origin, spoke about the samosa caucus being the flavor of the House, upon which all the attendees broke into applause. But on top of all of that, the Prime Minister really spoke at great length about all that binds India and the US together, and what will hopefully keep them bound in a partnership for a long time to come. Now, what could go wrong? Well, interestingly, during this trip as well, a lot of people did point to some of the niggles, questions, for example, about democracy. It was raised even by former President Barack Obama in an interview to Christiana Manpur. Other members of Congress had raised it at some point. There was this entire question raised that, do India and the US really share the same values anymore? What is the question of democracy? And if that was a question, if that was a genuine concern that at least some in America were expressing, well, the Prime Minister made a great point of trying to address that and address that directly. He spoke about it at length in his address to the US House of Congress.
Mr. Speaker and distinguished members, the beauty of democracy is the constant connect with the people, to listen to them and feel their pulse. And I know this takes a lot of time, energy, effort, and travel.
Well, let's now get in a very special guest, Elbridge Colby, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development. Elbridge is one of those people who's been arguing that why is there even this expectation that India should be some sort of a formal ally of the United States? It's better if India is a partner, because then India can also pull its own weight, and India wants to pull its own weight. India wants to be a great power by itself, and it wants to do its share, and the United States, far from objecting to that, should actually embrace it. Elbridge Colby now joining us. Elbridge, I know you've been talking about this and you've been writing about it for a while, that don't expect India to be a formal ally, and the United States should not want India to be a formal ally. It's almost better if the two are working as strategic partners, and as equal partners of some sort, and that's what India wants to be in any case.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, the piece was in the Economic Times earlier this week, but I mean, look, America, frankly, has many more responsibilities than it can handle. I mean, this is an objective fact as expressed in multiple defense strategies. And many of our allies do not pull their weight at all. I mean, for instance, NATO is supposed to spend 2% of GDP on defense. Each country is, and the majority do not do so. And of course, we also have problems in East Asia. And this is not to say that we should abandon our allies, but it's to say India, to me, is kind of the model of what we want. You know, if you were going to use an old-fashioned use of the term ally, I think we already are allies. You could say small a. We have aligned interests, and we're trying to work together as much as possible, but not this sort of formalized version that's emerged for the United States since the end of the Second World War. And I mean, it's very clear that India, of course, is immensely powerful, growing, but is also self-reliant and independent and wants to be. And I think that's exactly the kind of approach that we want. And I think the approach of the Modi government, of Minister Jaishankar, of looking for areas of alignment based on shared interests, that's nothing to, in fact, that's preferable because many of the countries that purportedly at least say they share our values, I'm not always so sure, at least in my own case, or for some of us in the United States, they don't really do much. So it's largely rhetorical, and we're way beyond the point where we can afford to have more of those.
So, Elbridge, if I can understand the thesis that you are putting forward, and that seems to be what the United States has more or less accepted right now, is that, look, India is rising as a global power. We should assist that, help that, celebrate that, encourage that as much as we possibly can, because an India that is self-reliant and self-sufficient and able to look after its own interests in this part of the world, that actually contributes back to American security more than if India was just some sort of a treaty partner and agreeing to say, yes, we agree with everything that you're doing, but essentially not contributing in its own way, not pulling its own weight. So an independent, strong India is actually probably better for the United States, because in most of the cases, it will in any case end up doing the things that the United States would have liked to be seeing done in this part of the world.
Yes, and not do it because of trying to please us or trying to curry favor with us or anything like that, but doing it for your own reasons. And the confident nationalism that I think Prime Minister Modi expressed in his speech to the Congress this week showed that. 75 years since independence, as he said, 1,000 years of foreign rule, and now a stout and confident Indian nation, which is now the largest in the world. I mean, if you compare that, and I say this to them directly, the Germans, for instance, rhetorically, they're with us a lot, but they have not even really moved on their so-called Zeitenwende. And, most of the things that are being done in Eastern Europe are being done by the United States or by Poland, which has a comparable kind of perspective to India, which I think is most welcome. Meantime, the Indians are, incredibly formidable and well-respected military and actually clashing directly with the PLA, not because you want to do it for the Americans, but because you're jealously guarding your national territory. And I think that's exactly the kind of approach we want. And I would take that every day of the week and twice on Sunday over a country that may vote with us in these multilateral institutions or signs on to these pledges, but doesn't follow through. And that's a real problem that we, the Americans, face. I'd much rather have India, the kind of model that India provides.
Raj, you got the chance to meet Prime Minister Modi. I expect you said all of this to him. Or what did he say to you?
Well, let me just say it was an exceptional honor to be able to meet with Prime Minister Modi, of course, the leader of the world's largest country, one of its greatest nations, and democratically elected and so forth. So that was really an inspiration to be able to meet with him. I made the point that I regularly make. I touched on in my Economic Times piece that I've made in the Hindustan Times earlier in the year, that we share a real danger from China, and that the military challenge is perhaps more acute in this decade or early into the next than at least some appreciate. And I think this is something that he and his team are clearly well aware of. And I think some of the do-outs that came out of this visit show that they appreciate the problem. So this was not a surprise to the Prime Minister, but he gave off the impression of confidence about the relationship, about India's growing place in the world and its ability to stand up to China. But my view is always, more, we can do more, and we in the United States need to do more and do so more quickly, was my main message.
Elbridge Colby, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Great talking to you.